Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie Mad Max, Fury Road, 2015, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. The wind howls over rusted sand dunes, sweeping across a scarred, sun-seared world that forgot softness a long time ago. Here, in a place where the earth is scorched and the sky hangs like a blistered sheet of steel, there are no second chances. Civilization has crumbled to dust. Empires are built not from diplomacy or dreams, but from gasoline, gunpowder, and brute force. In the middle of this broken, bleeding future stands a lone figure, half man, half myth, his past reduced to echoes. He doesn't speak much, doesn't need to. Because in this world, words are a luxury, and survival is the only language anyone still understands. The landscape is not lifeless, though. It pulses with violence, with desperation, with the sound of monstrous engines roaring across the desert like beasts on the hunt. Metal grinds against metal. Blood mixes with sand. And from the towering citadel of a tyrant who calls himself God, an unlikely rebellion begins to stir. Not from soldiers, not from warlords, but from women. Women who have been owned, imprisoned, used as breeders and symbols. Now they choose something different. Now they choose freedom. The story ignites with fire and fury. No slow build, no quiet exposition. It hurls you into the chase from the very first breath. A war rig thunders out across the wasteland, its tires carving fury into the dirt, its cargo far more precious than fuel or water. A driver at the wheel, her eyes like storm clouds, her mission secret and desperate. She's not running from something, she's running to something. And inside the vehicle, hidden behind steel and shadows, 5 women carry the future in their hands. They are fleeing not just a tyrant, but an entire system. They are seeking redemption, rebirth, a green place they barely remember. The warlord, monstrous and messianic, does not take betrayal lightly. He summons his army, war boys painted white with devotion, their lungs soaked in chrome dreams. Among them is a zealot with hollow cheeks and haunted eyes, who will soon find himself questioning everything he's ever worshipped. The desert becomes the arena. The war rig becomes a lifeboat. And a former captive, now chained and muzzled, becomes an unwilling participant in this mad escape. At first, he's just a resource, another tool strapped to the front of a charging vehicle. But the road has a way of changing people. The action doesn't slow, it never slows. Every frame is a heartbeat, every chase a symphony of destruction. But amid the explosions, the car flips, the blinding sandstorms that swallow entire convoys, there's something more profound unfolding. Trust begins to take root. Not easily. Not quickly. But between a hardened driver and a broken man, between fleeing wives and a dying fanatic, the bonds of shared purpose begin to form. No speeches, no sentimental flashbacks. Just looks. Decisions. Sacrifices. The pursuit twists and turns through a world that feels hand-forged and apocalyptic. Canyons crawling with biker gangs, a swamp of sinking mud and crows, skeleton cities swallowed by dunes. Every location tells a story of a civilization that tried, failed, and fell. The rig rolls on, battered and bleeding, its passengers pushed to the edge. And when the green place turns out to be nothing but poisoned soil and faded memory, hope threatens to wither. But despair is not the end. It's a pivot. Because what began as a flight becomes a return. What started as escape becomes revolution. The path forward is through the fire, not away from it. The answer is not in hiding, but in turning around and taking back the very thing that was stolen. The citadel, with its hoarded water, its enslaved masses, its tyrant perched high above the broken, must become theirs. The war rig is turned. The hunted become the hunters. And the final act is not a retreat, it's an assault. The climax is a relentless ballet of death and defiance. Wheels spin, bodies fall, engines scream. And in the chaos, choices are made that speak louder than any words. A war boy offers himself not for glory, but for belief in something better. A warrior sacrifices her strength to take the final shot. And a man once consumed by ghosts finally finds purpose not in vengeance, but in letting go. When the dust settles, when the last breath is taken and the engine's roar fades into silence, what's left is not a clean victory. It's not a return to order. It's something messier, more human. A moment where those who were once silenced now stand above the crowd, not as rulers, but as symbols of a different way. A hand reaches out. A glance says more than a lifetime. And the road ahead, still cracked and cruel, seems just a little less lonely. Beneath all the spectacle, beneath the adrenaline-soaked surface, the story carries something vital. A meditation on survival, yes, but also on hope. On the idea that even in the most broken worlds, seeds of change can grow in the unlikeliest places. That redemption is not earned through violence, but through trust, through sacrifice, through choosing again and again to be more than what the world expects of you. And that maybe, just maybe, even in a world gone mad, there is still room for humanity. You just have to drive straight into the storm to find it. He opens his eyes in a wasteland of silence, surrounded by heat waves and whispers of a past that no longer matters. The world he once knew is gone, turned to dust, bone, and rust. There are no nations, no cities, no rules. Only the road, the roar of engines, and the hunger for something more. More fuel, more blood, more control. In this place, survival isn't a right. It's a relentless, unending war. And he is alone. Hunted, haunted, held together not by hope, but by instinct. And yet, even now, he runs. Chains clatter as they drag him through the crumbling rocks of the citadel, a towering fortress carved into the desert's bones. He is captured, branded, reduced to a universal donor, a blood bag, they call him. To them, he isn't a man. He's a resource. A piece of machinery to be used, drained, discarded. Stripped of identity, his memories flash in violent fragments. Faces, screams, a child lost in the dust. But there's no time to mourn. The war boys have claimed him, and time in this place moves only forward, like wheels grinding against sand. Far above him, the tyrant rules. A towering grotesque draped in armor made of old-world detritus, breathing through a mask that pumps life into his failing lungs. He is called Immortan Joe, and to the thirsty masses below, he is a god. He controls the water, opening the floodgates only to reinforce their dependence. His empire is built on starvation and fear. He promises salvation to those who serve him, paints Valhalla in chrome, and sends his pale, dying war boys to die with a smile. Among his loyal is Imperator Furiosa, a warrior with a shorn head and a mechanical arm, respected for her ruthlessness, trusted for her obedience. She's been assigned to drive the war rig, a monstrous machine built for battle, outfitted with weapons and fury. Her mission is simple: lead a convoy to collect gasoline and return. But on the road, the wheels turn in more ways than one. Without warning, Furiosa veers off course. She doesn't explain. She doesn't ask permission. She heads east, into the desert. At first, the war boys assume it's a detour, a strategic shift. But the truth becomes clear with terrifying speed. She's gone rogue. And she's not alone. Hidden within the rig's massive tanker are 5 women, Immortan Joe's prized wives. They are not prisoners in chains, but in role. Each of them bears the brand of ownership. But now they're fleeing, leaving behind golden cages lined with horror. Each carries her own scars, her own reason for escape. Some bear his children. Others bear his hatred. All of them carry defiance. When Joe discovers the betrayal, the rage is volcanic. He suits up, his grotesque armor sealing him like a relic of war, and unleashes the fury of his fleet. The desert explodes into motion. The rig is pursued by convoys of metal monsters, spikes and flame bursting from their sides, each vehicle an extension of the madness that drives them. And strapped to the front of one of them, chained like a hood ornament, is the blood bag, the captive whose name no one cares to ask. But he is not just an accessory. He is watching, waiting. And when the chaos begins, he acts. A titanic chase unfolds across the sands, vehicles screaming through dunes, engines howling with violence. Gunfire rains, tires burst, bodies fly. Amid the chaos, he escapes his bonds, fights for his life, and finds himself inside the rig, face to face with the one who took him prisoner and the ones she now protects. They don't trust him. He doesn't trust them. But the bullets don't discriminate. He becomes their unwilling ally, at first, just to survive. The rig thunders on, unstoppable and wounded. Every mile they gain is a miracle. But the desert has no mercy. Joe's army follows, relentless. They don't need sleep. They don't need rest. Fueled by blind devotion, they believe death in battle will earn them paradise. Among them is Nux, a war boy with a skeletal frame and eyes burning with fanaticism. He sees his destiny in flames and chrome, desperate to impress his god and die in glory. When he fails, when he's thrown from his ride and left behind, he's taken in, unexpectedly, by the very people he tried to destroy. One of the wives, kind and curious despite everything, shows him compassion. It confuses him. It softens him. A crack forms in the cult's armor, and through it, the seed of something different begins to grow. Inside the rig, tension simmers. The man and the warrior stare at each other through distrust and desperation. Neither has time for sentiment. She wants to reach her destination, a place she calls the Green Place, a paradise remembered from childhood. A place untouched by the ruin. A place to start again. He wants to survive. He wants silence. But slowly, as the miles pass and the battles mount, something shifts. He begins to see her not as an enemy, but as a mirror. Not just strong, but wounded. Not just cold, but burning with purpose. Their goals begin to align, not through speeches, but through necessity. He saves her. She saves him. The wives begin to look at him with less fear. Even Nux, once a zealot, begins to question everything he believed. They cross into dangerous terrain, the canyon, a passageway watched by a gang of spiked riders who demand tribute. Furiosa has an arrangement, but the plan crumbles when Joe's army closes in. What follows is carnage, an ambush, an escape, the rig narrowly sliding through collapsing rock as gunfire lights the sky. The convoy is slowed but not stopped, and the rig, though battered, rolls on. The desert opens before them, wide and endless. But the road is not just made of sand. It is paved with ghosts. The man begins to see them again. His past, the child he failed, the faces he can't forget. Guilt clings to him like dust. He is haunted not by what happened, but by what he didn't do. And as he watches Furiosa fight for a future she hasn't even seen, he begins to wonder if redemption is still possible. Not for the world, but for himself. She leads them onward, past the bones of old machinery and the scattered relics of a world that once dreamed of progress. They are nearing their goal. The Green Place. It is close. She can feel it. But when they arrive, when the marshland stretches before them, rotting and drowned, they realize the truth. It's gone. The place of hope, the memory of life, is now a graveyard of poisoned water and twisted trees. The dream is dead. And with it, for a moment, so is she. But not him. Not anymore. The man who once ran now stands still. And in the silence that follows their failure, he sees the path they must take, not away, but back. Not to escape, but to fight. To turn the rig around and drive through the very heart of hell. To take the citadel not as thieves, but as liberators. To tear down the tyrant's throne and offer the people something more than water spilled from a ledge. He tells her. She listens. The desert waits. The rig is turned. The battle is coming. And this time, they ride not for survival. They ride for something more. The wind shifts, and with it, everything. What was meant to be a journey forward now becomes a charge into the very jaws of the storm they thought they'd escaped. The road they left behind, the one littered with flame and dust and screams, is the only path that remains. But it's no longer an escape. It's a mission. Not to survive, but to return. To take back what was stolen, to tear down the fortress of cruelty from the inside, and to let something new rise from the wreckage. They have one vehicle, one plan, and no margin for error. The decision to go back doesn't come easily. Furiosa, once so sure, now bears the weight of a broken dream. The green place, the memory that pulled her across the sands, has dissolved into rot and death. The Vuvolini, the fierce desert women she once called home, are a flickering remnant of what they used to be. They ride motorcycles now, their hair braided with bone and wire, their eyes sharper than any blade. She looks at them and sees not what was lost, but what still might be saved. He speaks now, not much, but enough. His voice, so long silent, carries the clarity of someone who has found something to believe in again. He tells them the truth as he sees it. The citadel is exposed. Its war parties are scattered across the sands, chasing ghosts. Its defenses are weak. Its people, starving, hopeless, are ripe for revolution. If they can make it back alive, if they can hold the war rig through the pass, they can return to the fortress not as fugitives, but as liberators. So they ride. Across the endless desert once more, into the rising sun, into the trap they know is waiting. Every mile is a risk. Every rumble in the distance could be the enemy closing in. And soon enough, the horizon is filled with it again. The roar of engines, the glint of chrome, the swarm of madness that follows Immortan Joe like a storm cloud. The war parties descend, led by the tyrant himself, flanked by his monstrous sons, his pale zealots, his broken empire on wheels. His fury is volcanic. The betrayal cuts deep. His wives, the ones he kept caged like treasures, now ride free before him. The imperator he once trusted now leads the charge against him. And the man he tried to erase, his blood bag, is now the backbone of the rebellion. What unfolds is not just action. It is chaos sculpted into art. The war rig tears through canyons and salt flats, every inch of its surface armed, armored, defiant. The Vuvolini ride alongside, sharpshooters picking off enemies from the backs of bikes, dropping grenades like seeds of death into the engines of pursuers. Bullets fly. Harpoons pierce metal. Vehicles flip and burn. And through it all, Furiosa drives like her soul depends on it, because it does. But victory never comes without cost. One by one, the Allies fall. The Vuvolini fight with grace and ferocity, but the numbers are against them. The desert drinks their blood, quiet and indifferent. Amid the wreckage, Furiosa herself is wounded, stabbed, brutalized, barely able to stand. Yet she does not fall. She clings to the wheel, her vision swimming, her breath ragged, and pushes forward. Nux, the war boy who once worshipped death, now sees life differently. Through the kindness of one of the wives, capable, he glimpsed another path. Redemption. Meaning. He becomes the final key to the plan. With the war rig's main passage blocked and the escape threatened, Nux takes the wheel in a last act of sacrifice. He kisses Capable's hand, whispers a farewell, and drives the rig into a collapsing canyon, blocking the path behind them. The explosion is blinding. The sacrifice, total. It is not in vain. The surviving rebels push forward, a handful of warriors and former captives now leading a revolution. Immortan Joe's forces are splintered, his war machine cracked open. Furiosa, bleeding and breathless, confronts him atop the rig. Their battle is not just physical, it's symbolic. The abused striking down the abuser. the enslaved ending the reign of their captor. And when the final chain is torn, when Joe is destroyed in a storm of blood and metal, it is not with grandeur but with grim, brutal justice. They return to the citadel broken but not beaten. The climb back up the towering fortress is slow, almost surreal. The gates open not with resistance, but with wonder. The people, those who lived beneath the tyrant's rule, who bathed in his shadows and begged for drops of his water, now see the truth. They see the wives. They see Furiosa. They see the man who helped bring them home. And they raise them up, not as rulers, but as saviors. The final image is not one of violence. It is of water. Water, once hoarded, now released. The people drink. The children laugh. Life, long denied, trickles down like grace. And above it all, Furiosa stands, no longer searching for a dream long dead, but bearing witness to a future reborn. She has scars, yes, loss, ghosts, but she also has the wheel in her hand, and the power at last to steer toward something new. The man does not stay. He fades into the crowd, vanishing into myth, as if he was never truly there. No name, no glory, just the road calling once more. Because for him, the journey never ends. The world is still broken, still dangerous, still in need of silent guardians. He disappears into the dust, just as he came. And somewhere out in the wasteland, another story begins. In the middle of the wasteland, under the merciless glare of a sun that never seems to blink, walks a man who has lost everything, except his instinct to survive. He doesn't speak much, and when he does, his words are carved from stone, hard, weathered, shaped by pain. He is not a hero in the traditional sense. He's not charming, not righteous, not even particularly kind. But buried beneath layers of silence and scars, there's something else, something raw, relentless, almost holy in its refusal to die. It's not hope. It's not even purpose. It's motion. Keep moving. Stay alive. Don't look back. He is a ghost haunted by memory. Not memories that bring comfort or nostalgia, but jagged fragments that pierce him like glass. A child's scream. A mistake that can't be undone. A past soaked in blood and failure. These are the things that chase him. And yet, even in his brokenness, he notices. He watches. He calculates. And when the moment comes, when he finds himself thrust into a war rig with a band of desperate women fleeing a tyrant, he does not run. He fights. Not for redemption. Not yet. At first, it's just survival. But slowly, painfully, he begins to see that the ones who still believe in something might be worth fighting for after all. He doesn't lead with authority. He leads with action. With grit. With the kind of clarity that only comes from someone who has seen everything fall apart. He knows what not to do. What not to become. And somewhere along the way, in the blistering heat and screaming engines, he begins to change. Not dramatically. Not with grand speeches or sudden epiphanies. But in gestures. In choices. In the way he looks at Furiosa and sees not a tool or a threat, but an equal. Furiosa is the kind of character who could only rise from the ashes of a world like this. She's not armored in ideals. She's armored in grease, scars, and a prosthetic limb that isn't a symbol of weakness, but of weaponized resilience. She survived the citadel not because she was strong in body, though she is, but because she refused to let the place claim her soul. She learned its roads, learned its machines, learned how to be invisible in plain sight. And then, when the time was right, she turned and struck. Her decision to betray Immortan Joe isn't impulsive. It's surgical, calculated, planned. She hides the wives not just in a vehicle, but in a dream of the green place, of freedom, of reclamation. But the tragedy of Furiosa is that even her dream is a ghost. By the time she reaches the place that once gave her life meaning, it's dead. poisoned, gone. And she is forced to reckon with the truth, that her revolution cannot be rooted in the past. It must be forged in fire, here, now, on the road back. Furiosa doesn't cry when she realizes this. She screams. A primal wordless sound that tears the sky and echoes into the bones of the world. It's a rare crack in her armor. And it's real. Because for all her strength, all her fury, she is not unbreakable. She just keeps going anyway. That's what makes her unforgettable. Her strength is not in never falling. It's in what she chooses to do after she does. The wives she rescues are not passive damsels or background symbols of purity. Each of them is a full story, a voice, a history, a resistance in her own right. Their names, Toast, Capable, Cheido, Dag, and Angharad, aren't just for variety. They reflect different ways of enduring captivity. Dag, marked by Joe's obsession, fights with venom in her voice. Toast sharpens her words like knives. Cheido wavers, her fear pulling her toward surrender, yet she stays. Capable finds empathy even in the enemy, and Angharad, perhaps the bravest of them all, risks herself again and again until fate catches up with her. When Angharad falls, it isn't just a plot point, it's a loss that fractures the group. It reminds them that freedom costs. That escape is not the end of pain, but a new form of it. Yet they continue. Because by now, their flight has become more than self-preservation. It's rebellion. It's declaration. They are not things. They are not wives. They are not his. They are their own. And then there is Nux, a war boy, pale and sickly, raised on death and indoctrination. When we first meet him, he is a fanatic. He straps himself to the front of a vehicle like a martyr to a cross, inhaling chrome spray and screaming for Valhalla. But Nux is not evil. He's terrified, desperate to matter. His faith is not in cruelty, but in purpose, any purpose. And when that purpose shifts, when Capable shows him kindness, when he begins to see that Joe's promises are empty and rotted, his entire identity unravels. Nux doesn't become a hero overnight. He stumbles. He betrays. He fails. But eventually, he chooses. Not for glory, but for something gentler. Something quieter. A real connection. A single touch. A belief in someone else. And in the end, when he sacrifices himself to save the very people he once tried to destroy, it isn't a redemption arc played for tears. It's a choice that feels earned, human, and heartbreakingly sincere. Even the film's villains are crafted with unsettling depth. Immortan Joe is not just a tyrant. He's a prophet of decay. He doesn't rule with charisma. He rules with need. By controlling water, by hoarding beauty, by weaponizing scarcity, he becomes more than a dictator. He becomes the god of a dying world. He tells his war boys that they will rise again, that chrome and fire will cleanse their sins. And they believe him, because belief is easier than facing emptiness. Joe is grotesque not just in body, but in ideology. He turns people into property, into prayers, into fuel. His death isn't just an explosion or a final blow, it's a symbol. The tearing off of a face. The exposure of the lie. And when his body is hoisted before the people, lifeless and grotesque, it is not triumph that fills the air. It's release. A sigh. An ending long overdue. Even supporting characters, the bullet farmer, the people-eater, the Vuvolini, each carry the flavor of this world. The bullet farmer doesn't just fire weapons. He is one, blinded by his own firepower, raging into the dark. The people-eater, grotesquely fat and dripping with false opulence, represents the consumerism that devoured the old world. The Vuvolini are the remnants of a time when earth and woman were sacred, now scarred but still standing, still willing to fight for soil and soul. But the most important relationship isn't between enemies or lovers, it's between the man and Furiosa. They barely speak, and yet they communicate volumes. He offers his name late in the story. She never asks. When he gives his blood to save her life, there are no declarations, no swelling music. Just quiet urgency. Just hands moving with trust. Their partnership isn't romantic. It's something rarer. It's respect forged in battle. Equality earned through grit. By the time they part, there's no need for goodbyes. They understand each other in a way no words could touch. In a world obsessed with noise, their silence says everything. This story doesn't give its characters long soliloquies or tragic backstories. It gives them scars, glances, actions. It lets them earn our empathy not through exposition, but through endurance. Through the choices they make when the world gives them none. And that's the beauty of them. They are broken. They are battered. They are real. And in their fury, in their softness, in their willingness to rise again and again, they become something greater than survivors. They become the heartbeat of a world that refuses to die. Long before engines screamed across endless dunes and a war rig thundered through the salt-scorched heart of nowhere, long before chrome-covered war boys threw themselves into the arms of death and a silent man rode shotgun beside a one-armed warrior, the making of this cinematic juggernaut had already begun, shrouded in delays, near disasters, and decisions so bizarre they teetered between madness and genius. What would eventually storm into theaters as one of the most iconic action films of the 21st century almost never made it past the starting line. The story behind it is nearly as chaotic, as untamed, and as surreal as the world it brought to life. It took over 15 years for this film to become reality. The creator, George Miller, had been carrying the vision in his mind like a fever dream since the late 90s. After crafting the earlier chapters of the saga decades before, he didn't want to revisit it simply to repeat old triumphs. He wanted something operatic, something bold, something mythic and stripped to the bone. And so, he built a movie that was 90% chase sequence, light on dialogue, heavy on rhythm and symbolism. Essentially, a 2-hour symphony of movement. But nature, politics, and fate had other plans. The original plan was to film in the Australian outback, where the previous entries had also taken form. Everything was set, rigs were built, costumes prepared, locations scouted. And then the rains came. Unseasonal, unrelenting, and utterly transformative. The barren landscape that had been chosen to represent a post-apocalyptic wasteland suddenly burst into color. Wildflowers bloomed. The ground, once cracked and lifeless, turned green with life. It was beautiful, and completely wrong. Production halted. Years passed. Financing wavered. The world moved on. Studios lost faith. Miller remained patient, rebuilding quietly. At one point, the project was nearly transformed into an animated feature. Later, talks of 3D shooting emerged. Then it was shut down again. The fact that the movie even exists, let alone became a cultural touchstone, is nothing short of miraculous. And when it finally began shooting in earnest, it did so not in Australia, but in Namibia, on the skeletal coasts and blistered sands of the Namib Desert, one of the oldest and harshest on Earth. The decision came with its own strangeness. The cast and crew were now isolated, hundreds of miles from urban infrastructure, living in tents and trailers, breathing in dust storms that could last for days. The logistics were nightmarish. Vehicles broke constantly under the strain, crew members battled heat stroke, equipment vanished in the dunes. But for all the torment, there was magic in the madness. Almost everything seen on screen, every crash, every explosion, every acrobatic leap from one speeding vehicle to another, was real. No green screens. No digital shortcuts. George Miller, at 70 years old, stood on set daily, orchestrating these death-defying stunts with the calm of a surgeon and the vision of a mad poet. Over 150 custom vehicles were built for the film, each a functioning beast of metal and fire. There was the doof wagon, a mobile stage armed with war drums and a fire-spewing guitar, and yes, that guitar actually worked. The guitarist, known as the Doof Warrior, wore a 40-kilogram costume and played live while strapped to the back of a truck careening through the desert at full speed. He was portrayed by Iota, an Australian musician who is legally blind in one eye. That didn't stop him. Then there's the story of the polecats, stunt performers who swung back and forth on 30-foot metal poles mounted to moving vehicles. They trained for months in secret, mastering a style of movement somewhere between circus art and aerial combat. Each swing had to be timed perfectly. Each jump rehearsed endlessly. But even with the precision, danger was constant. During one sequence, a stunt performer fractured multiple ribs during a bad landing. He was back on set 3 days later. Tom Hardy, stepping into the titular role made famous by Mel Gibson, found himself adrift in the intensity of it all. At the time, he clashed with George Miller. The script was minimal, more storyboard than screenplay, and Hardy struggled to understand what exactly they were making. Tensions flared. Misunderstandings grew. It wasn't until the film premiered in Cannes, to thunderous standing ovations, that Hardy stood up in front of the press and publicly apologized to Miller. "I didn't understand your vision," he admitted. "But now I do." Charlize Theron, as Furiosa, carried her own burden. She shaved her head, wore grease and grit like armor. But behind the camera, the emotional toll of the shoot wore heavy. The isolation, the heat, the physical demands. Her relationship with Hardy was often tense, their personalities clashing like the war rigs they drove. Some days they wouldn't speak. Other days, they could barely look at each other. Ironically, that friction bled beautifully into their performances. The characters' relationship, one built on distrust, evolving slowly into respect, mirrored the off-screen energy between them. But perhaps the strangest fact of all is how structured the chaos really was. Despite the wild energy on screen, the film was choreographed like an opera. George Miller worked with his editor, Margaret Sixel, his wife, who had never cut an action film before. Her approach, cut not for continuity, but for emotion, for rhythm. The film contains over 2,700 individual cuts, each carefully timed to musical beats. The result is a relentless pace that feels almost breathless, but never confusing. Sixel would later win the Academy Award for Best Editing, and rightfully so. Her work became the unseen spine of the film. And she wasn't alone. The costume design, makeup, and production teams were working at the edge of sanity. From Joe's grotesque armor, made from old horse riding gear and breathing tubes, to the wives' silk gowns, repurposed from parachutes, every costume told a story. Even the war boy's skin, painted ghost white, was based on medical research about radiation sickness. Immortan Joe himself was played by Hugh Keays-Byrne, the same actor who had played Toe Cutter, the villain in the original 1979 film. Decades later, Miller brought him back, this time under pounds of prosthetics, to portray a new kind of tyrant. His performance was mostly physical, filled with guttural roars and presence more than dialogue. He became a symbol, not just a man. Other strange pieces float to the surface like forgotten treasures. During one shoot, a rare desert beetle crawled into the rig's mechanics and short-circuited several systems. The entire day was delayed. The crew began calling the insect the Prophet. At one point, the wind was so violent that dunes shifted overnight, erasing tire tracks and forcing reblocking of multiple action scenes. And then there were the locals, Namibian tribespeople who sometimes wandered into the edges of frame, drawn by curiosity. Rather than ask them to leave, Miller invited them to watch, even hiring some as security and assistants. And let's not forget the storyboard. The entire film was storyboard first, no traditional script. The team created over 3,500 panels, essentially a graphic novel, before filming even began. Dialogue was added later. This visual-first approach allowed the film to feel like a living comic book, abstract, pulsing, visceral. It was a gamble, but it paid off. And in the end, the film didn't just make it to screens. It dominated them. Critics didn't just praise it, they surrendered to it. Audiences returned again and again, caught in the film's rhythm, its madness, its strange, unflinching beauty. At the Oscars, it won 6 technical awards and was nominated for Best Picture, an almost unheard-of feat for an R-rated action film. But even now, years later, what people remember isn't just the awards or the explosions. They remember how it felt. How it gripped them from the first frame and didn't let go. How it made something savage feel sacred. How a movie with almost no exposition, made in the middle of the desert by a director in his 70s, redefined what action cinema could be. And how, somewhere beneath the sand, in the roar of engines and the silence between lines, something truly rare was born. A masterpiece made from madness. A vision that refused to die. A world built from rust and fire, and brought to life by the strangest, most beautiful decisions imaginable. In a film world often bloated with excess and empty spectacle, there came a story told almost entirely in movement, a breathless roar across a wasteland where words were few, but meaning echoed like thunder. Critics didn't expect it. Audiences weren't prepared. And yet, what unfolded was not just an action movie, but a cinematic act of rebellion, against genre expectations, against narrative conventions, against the idea that a post-apocalyptic chase scene could not be profound. It opens, not with a whisper or a slow burn, but with chaos, a man, alone, hunted, gnawed by the ghosts of a lost past, snatched into a prison of metal and ritual. That first act, where Max is reduced to a blood bag, a piece of machinery strapped to a war machine, is not simply world-building. It's a statement. It declares that the body is no longer sacred in this universe, only useful. Critics latched onto that early metaphor, humanity reduced to function, to resource, to fuel. It set the tone, not just for the plot, but for the film's deeper commentary on dehumanization and control. The citadel looms, both physically and thematically, over the narrative's first major shift. Immortan Joe, grotesque and divine in equal measure, hoards water, beauty, power. He becomes an embodiment of tyranny built from scarcity, less a man and more a system. A system of greed, of haves and have-nots, of divine authority wrapped in industrial tubes and rotting flesh. For many critics, Joe's citadel symbolized the brutal intersection of fascism and resource capitalism, where every drop is leveraged, every breath a transaction. His wives are not companions, but commodities. His soldiers are not men, but worshippers, willingly sacrificed for chrome-drenched glory. When Furiosa breaks rank, the story truly begins. That deviation, her turn off course into the wasteland, is not merely physical. It's revolutionary. In that act, critics saw the beginning of a new myth. Furiosa, for all her steel and silence, does what no one else dared. She says no. She takes the wives, the symbols of ownership and reproductive utility, and makes them fugitives, not hostages. Critics praised this moment not just for its action implications, but for its thematic audacity. In a genre so often dominated by male agency, here was a woman not only taking the wheel, but becoming the emotional and narrative engine of the film. The war rig's flight across the desert is relentless, and rightly so. The film barely pauses. But in that momentum, a new kind of storytelling emerges, one built on glances, gestures, choices made under duress. What dialogue exists is lean, purposeful, trimmed of all fat. And yet, beneath the roar of engines and the grind of gears, emotional resonance bleeds through. Critics marveled at how, even in the height of madness, the film finds humanity. The wives are not faceless. They argue. They cry. They comfort each other. And Furiosa, scarred and battered, is never glamorized. She is respected. Perhaps the most celebrated and dissected scene is Furiosa's scream into the desert after discovering that the green place, her childhood Eden, has become a poisoned swamp. There are no words, just grief. Raw, explosive, unfiltered. In that scream, critics found the soul of the film. The collapse of idealism. The shattering of dreams. But more importantly, the refusal to stop. That moment became an anthem for resilience. The fact that Furiosa stands again, wounds and all, and chooses to return and fight, is not a plot twist, it's a thesis. The decision to turn back toward the Citadel rather than continue running away is a pivotal shift not just in strategy, but in theme. Critics noted how the film, in this moment, turns its gaze inward. The journey isn't about reaching a promised land. It's about reclaiming power. The women don't seek sanctuary. They seek justice. They don't escape oppression. They crush it. This reversal of narrative expectation, flight becoming assault, was hailed as both bold and politically charged. It transformed the film from chase movie to revolution fable. And then there's Max. For all the fire and fury around him, his arc is quiet, subtle, easy to miss if you're only watching for spectacle. But critics were keen to unpack it. He begins as a beast, tethered, voiceless, nameless. A man broken by guilt, haunted by those he failed. But through his reluctant alliance with Furiosa, through his observation of her pain and her strength, he finds not redemption, but relevance. He doesn't save her. She saves herself. But he helps. He lifts. He bleeds. And finally he lets go. That final act, Max offering his name to Furiosa, is monumental not because it changes the plot, but because it completes his transformation. For the first time in a long time, he is not just surviving. He is connecting. He is human again. Critics noted how rare it is in action cinema for masculinity to be redefined in this way, not through dominance, but through support. Not through violence, but through vulnerability. The character of Nux was also singled out in many critical reflections. Initially a zealot, a fanatic painting his teeth in chrome and chasing a glorious death, Nux becomes the film's heart in a strange, unexpected way. His transformation, from tool of tyranny to agent of change, is not forced or rushed. It is nurtured through empathy, through kindness, through capable. Critics praised this subplot as a testament to the film's emotional layering. In a lesser film, Nux would have died screaming. Here, he dies smiling, but for entirely different reasons. Not because he's chasing Valhalla, but because he's found something worth protecting. The film's treatment of silence also drew significant praise. In a medium so often dominated by exposition and explanation, the choice to let characters communicate through motion, expression, and action felt radical. Critics observed how Furiosa and Max say little, yet reveal volumes. Every flick of the eyes, every shift of posture, carries narrative weight. The film trusts its audience to feel without being told, and in doing so, achieves a kind of purity of storytelling that few modern blockbusters even attempt. And then there's the sound. Not just the music, though Junkie XL's thunderous score is essential, but the sound design. The roar of the engines. The clank of metal. The crackle of fire. These aren't just noises. They are language. Critics often compared the film's structure to a symphony, each vehicle, each scream, each explosion a note in a larger composition. The desert becomes a drum. The war rig a string section. The Doof Warriors' guitar a shrieking solo. And through it all, there is rhythm. There is pacing. There is grace inside the chaos. Visually, the film's palette became another point of critical celebration. Unlike the desaturated tones typical of dystopian films, here the world is saturated. Sky bleeds orange, sand burns gold, explosions bloom in vivid red. The use of color, critics noted, was not just aesthetic. It was thematic. The world may be broken, but it is not dead. Life still pulses in the cracks. Hope is not gray. It's blazing, beautiful, and terrifying. The role of George Miller as orchestrator of all this madness was the final critical puzzle piece. At 70 years old, he returned to the genre he helped create and redefined it entirely. Critics hailed his direction as masterful, his control over tone, pace, and atmosphere nearly unparalleled. What he created was not just a revival. It was a reinvention. A film that honored its roots while transcending them. In the aftermath of its release, critical acclaim was not only immediate, it was nearly unanimous. The film landed on dozens of Best of the Decade lists. It earned 10 Academy Award nominations, winning 6. But more than the accolades, it shifted the conversation. About action. About gender in genre films. About the possibilities of visual storytelling. Many critics returned, again and again, to the notion of paradox. How could something so loud be so thoughtful? How could something so simple in structure be so rich in theme? How could a chase movie be one of the most emotionally resonant films of the decade? But that was the magic. It didn't choose between spectacle and soul. It burned through both. In every gear shift, every grunt, every final breath, the film declared that even in a world stripped of kindness, people could still find their way to each other. That even in madness, there could be meaning. That fury, when guided by purpose, could lead not to destruction, but to rebirth. And in doing so, it became more than a film. It became a landmark. A turning point. A beacon screaming through the dust. A reminder that stories, no matter how loud, still matter most when they remember what it means to feel. The first thing you have to understand is this: the desert doesn't care about your movie. It doesn't care how many storyboards you've drawn, how much money you've raised, or how many Oscars you might win one day. The Namib Desert, ancient, merciless, spectacular, will swallow your plans whole if you let it. And yet, into this inhospitable kingdom of dust and wind, a caravan of dreamers dragged hundreds of tons of steel, enough camera gear to sink a ship, and one burning vision from a 70-year-old Australian director who wanted to redefine what cinema could be, again. What unfolded in that sandstorm, over months of grueling, nearly impossible work, wasn't just a film shoot. It was an epic of its own. George Miller didn't approach this story the way most filmmakers would. He didn't start with a script. He started with pictures. Thousands of them. The film was pre-visualized entirely through storyboards, over 3,500 panels, before a single frame of film was shot. Miller wasn't interested in traditional exposition. He wanted the story to live in the motion, the rhythm, the visual language. It would move like a graphic novel brought to screaming, blistering life. That approach required a level of precision most action films avoid. Every scene, every shot, every edit was accounted for months before the first camera rolled. The crew didn't just rehearse dialogue, they rehearsed movement. The war rigs weren't just designed to look intimidating. They were built from scratch, each one engineered to actually work. No CGI stand-ins. No green screen shortcuts. The doof wagon really drove. The guitarist really played. His flame-throwing guitar, in fact, weighed over 130 pounds and actually spat fire while the actor was strapped to bungee cords on a moving truck. Filming in Namibia came out of necessity. Originally, the movie was supposed to be shot in the Australian outback, just like the earlier chapters in the saga. But nature had other plans. After years of drought, the desert bloomed. Unexpected rains turned the bone-dry landscape into a field of wildflowers, gorgeous but useless for a post-apocalyptic wasteland. And so the production packed up and moved halfway across the world, to where the desert remained as Miller remembered, brutal and cinematic. Once there, the production became a nomadic village of artistry and chaos. Hundreds of crew members lived out of trailers. Temperatures often soared above 110 degrees. Sandstorms would roll in, sometimes for days, forcing filming to halt while entire sets disappeared beneath shifting dunes. The trucks would seize up, metal would warp in the heat, and actors, drenched in layers of grime, prosthetics, and armor, performed under conditions that tested every limit. Tom Hardy, taking over the role of Max, had never worked on a project like this. The physical demands were enormous. Long shooting days. Few lines. Lots of dust. He later confessed that during the shoot, he didn't fully understand what kind of movie they were making. There was so little traditional dialogue, and so much emphasis on physicality and blocking, that he feared they were chasing something too abstract to work. "I owe George Miller an apology," he would say later. "I didn't see it then. But I see it now." Charlize Theron, as Furiosa, dove in head first. She shaved her head, trained for months, and carried much of the film's emotional weight. But the environment pushed her to the edge. The intensity of the production, coupled with the isolation of the desert, created friction, not just on screen, but off. Theron and Hardy famously clashed during production. At one point, tensions ran so high that they requested separate vehicles during transport. Yet, in one of cinema's strangest alchemies, their real-life distance translated into a powerful, icy tension that crackled on screen. The stunt team, however, was where much of the behind-the-scenes legend truly lived. Led by veteran stunt coordinator Guy Norris, they trained like soldiers and performed like dancers. The polecats, stuntmen swinging 20 to 30 feet above the war rig on flexible poles, were real. No wires, no CGI safety nets. These men leapt, balanced, and fought while hanging off speeding vehicles barreling across open desert. Each of their routines was timed to the second, choreographed to the beat of an imagined score, executed with terrifying beauty. Every stunt was dangerous. Every take had to be perfect. One performer broke several ribs after a hard landing and was back within a week. Another fell from a rig but rolled correctly, escaping with minor injuries. There was an almost sacred respect among the stunt crew, a recognition that they were not just risking their bodies, but contributing to something unlike anything ever attempted before. Then there was the production design, which functioned like its own cinematic mythology. Colin Gibson, the production designer, wasn't just tasked with building vehicles. He had to create an entire ecosystem of scavenged, reimagined machinery. Each car, bike, and war rig told a story. The Doof Wagon was an armored sound system and mobile battle anthem. The Gigahorse was constructed from two 1959 Cadillac bodies stacked on top of each other, powered by twin engines and flame-belching exhausts. Every vehicle was built to run. Every detail, from the bullet holes to the skull emblems, was crafted by hand. Even the war paint had a story. The white chalk used to cover the war boys was symbolic of their mortality, their reverence for death. Makeup artists developed unique patterns for each war boy to reflect their status and role. The scars, tattoos, and chrome-grinned skulls weren't just aesthetic, they were visual dialects in a world without words. One of the most fascinating quirks of the production was the music. Junkie XL, tasked with composing the score, created a thundering industrial soundscape that was as important as any character. But what many don't realize is that much of the score was played during filming. That's right, the drums, the riffs, the thunderous chords weren't just added in post-production. Speakers were mounted to the war rigs, and battle music blared across the desert to sync the stunts with the tempo. The result? The action moved to the beat. Literally. And then there were the practical effects, the explosions, the crashes, the rolling vehicles. Every flip, every crash, was done with real steel. The climactic war rig explosion? That wasn't computer-generated. It was a carefully orchestrated demolition, with dozens of cameras capturing it from every angle. Pyrotechnics experts walked the line between insanity and genius, creating chaos so real that the shockwaves were felt a mile away. Despite all the madness, the atmosphere behind the scenes was electric. There was frustration, yes. Exhaustion. Tension. But also awe. Cast and crew knew they were part of something singular. There was a quiet reverence for George Miller, his calm, his clarity, his willingness to sit in the dirt with his storyboards and quietly guide his team through the storm. Perhaps one of the oddest stories is that the film's editor, Margaret Sixel, who happened to be Miller's wife, had never edited an action film before. Miller believed a fresh perspective would prevent the editing from becoming stale or formulaic. She approached it like a ballet. Each shot was cut not just for continuity, but for rhythm and emotion. Her work earned an Academy Award and became a benchmark in action editing. The studio didn't know what to make of it at first. A nearly wordless, female-led action film with massive practical stunts and almost no traditional structure? The odds weren't in its favor. And yet, when the film premiered at Cannes, the reaction was immediate, visceral, explosive. Standing ovations. Critical raves. Word of mouth that spread like wildfire. What was once seen as a risky passion project became a triumph. And so the legend was born, not just of the film, but of how it was made. Of how hundreds of people braved heatstroke, injury, isolation, and creative madness to bring something to life that didn't follow the rules. That didn't compromise. That didn't blink. A film made by hand. A story told through fire and metal. A production that mirrored its own plot, a relentless journey through obstacles, fueled by vision, courage, and fury. And in the end, all of it, every long day, every bruise, every wild design, poured into the screen with such raw authenticity that audiences didn't just watch it. They felt it in their bones. Because sometimes, when you chase madness across the desert long enough, you come out the other side with a masterpiece. The world began with a scream, of engines, of wind, of memory breaking apart in the heat. There is no lush prologue, no gentle introduction. Only the sound of madness, the crackle of dust across rusted metal, and the sight of a desert that stretches into forever, as dry and pitiless as the bones that litter its surface. This is a story not of where civilization once stood, but of what's left when it crumbles. And in this place, the setting isn't just background. It's prophecy, character, judgment, and home. There's a reason this wasteland feels so unshakably real. Because it is. The Namib Desert, where most of the story was filmed, is not a soundstage illusion or a green screen trick. It's an ancient stretch of earth, millions of years old, where the sand is red and the wind sings like a funeral dirge. The choice to film here wasn't just aesthetic, it was foundational. This desert doesn't suggest the end of the world. It is the end. Its dunes swallow time. Its emptiness amplifies every sound, every scream. Against this canvas, every burst of flame, every roar of an engine, feels biblical. The setting is not built to support life. It's built to test it. You feel it in every frame. The air vibrates with heat. The sun glares down, unmerciful, flattening everything beneath it. There's no shade, no shelter, just endless openness, a crucible of dust and sky. And yet, somehow, life clings to the cracks. War boys ride across it in weaponized relics of a dead civilization. The survivors wear their homes on their backs, their identities tattooed in scars. And deep within this scorched hell stands a monolith of order, of rot, of ritual, the Citadel. Rising from stone cliffs like a fortress built into a bleeding wound, the Citadel is the empire of Immortan Joe, the tyrant who hoards life itself. It's not just a stronghold, it's a visual metaphor. Water trickles from its peaks while the desperate crowd below scramble for drops. Agriculture is grown in hidden upper chambers, while disease festers in the caverns below. The Citadel was built to be both a sanctuary and a prison, both God's throne and the devil's tower. From a cinematic standpoint, it is carved in chiaroscuro, shadowed, decaying, hierarchical in every line. The verticality of the location creates a power structure so visually obvious it requires no dialogue. Those above live. Those below beg. Cinematographer John Seale frames the Citadel like a fallen Eden, majestic in ruin, magnificent in cruelty. But the true setting of the story is the road. The road is endless, winding through salt flats, shifting dunes, storm-lashed canyons. It's not mapped. It doesn't need to be. It is both literal and symbolic, the road to freedom, the road to damnation, the road with no return. And it changes as the story changes. In the beginning, the road is escape. Furiosa drives into the unknown, dust billowing behind her, the horizon a promise she hopes to keep. The cinematography reflects this. sweeping wide shots that capture the full scale of the desert's emptiness. The camera moves with urgency, always forward, always on the edge of control. But as the story progresses, the road becomes something else. A mirror. A question. A choice. When the characters reach the poisoned remains of the green place, the road reverses. They turn back. The camera begins to focus inward. Faces fill the frame. Emotions break through the grime. What was once vast becomes intimate. And the desert, once a thing to flee through, becomes the path toward confrontation and reclamation. Color is another weapon in the film's visual arsenal, wielded with precision. Unlike most post-apocalyptic films, which drain their palette into desaturated grays, this one is drenched in bold hues. The sky is cobalt. The sand burns orange. Fire explodes in hot yellows. The decision to saturate rather than mute the environment turns every frame into a painting of contradiction, beauty in ruin, poetry in annihilation. Critics often noted how the color scheme didn't depict death, but transcendence through survival. The world may be dying, but it's doing so in flames, not in silence. Night scenes, rare but powerful, invert the palette. The swamp is green, thick with death. The silhouettes of crows perch like omens on rotting posts. Fog creeps in, muting everything. For the first time, the characters are no longer defined by heat and dust, but by darkness and stillness. It's a break from momentum, a moment of dread, of slowing heartbeat. The cinematography here draws breath. Long takes, muted sound, shadows swallowing the light. It's the antithesis of the chase, and it hits harder because of it. But perhaps the most defining visual choice is the way the camera captures motion. Miller didn't want chaos for chaos' sake. He wanted clarity. And so, he and Seal chose to center the subject of every shot. It seems simple, but in action filmmaking, it's revolutionary. In every frame, your eye knows where to look. The war rig, the bike, the explosion, it's all grounded in space, never lost in the edit. The film was shot in a 2.35:1 aspect ratio, wide and cinematic, but always composed with discipline. Even at its most frantic, it never loses its geography. Then there are the close-ups. The grit on Furiosa's face. The flicker in Max's eyes. The chrome-coated teeth of the war boys. These details, sharp and visceral, contrast with the epic scale of the background. They remind us that within this massive world, the story is still human. That behind the fire and sand, there are people, broken, desperate, determined. Sound design plays a vital role in building the setting's texture. The engines don't just growl, they sing. Each vehicle has its own oral identity, from the low purr of the war rig to the shriek of bikes darting through the canyons. Explosions are not just loud, they're layered, mixed with the screech of tearing metal and the distant howl of wind. The citadel groans with ancient machinery. Water falls like a hymn. And through it all, Junkie XL's score pulses like a second heartbeat, sometimes soaring, sometimes pounding, always alive. Even costume and makeup serve the setting. The people look like they've been sculpted from the desert itself. Sand-caked skin. Dried blood. Leather stitched from scavenged pieces of the old world. Furiosa's black grease war paint isn't for show, it's camouflage, both literal and emotional. The war boy's chalky skin is ritual, rebellion, a visual claim of belonging. The setting is worn not just on the land, but on the bodies of those who move through it. Every piece of the world builds into the myth. This is not a place built yesterday. It has history, even if it's never fully explained. The bullet farm, the gas town, the people in stilts crossing the bog, the women who ride with Furiosa, all of them suggest civilizations that have evolved under pressure. The setting never needs to explain itself. It just is. And because it is real, because it was filmed where earth meets sky in unrelenting silence, the viewer feels it deep in the skin. There's a kind of honesty in that. A trust that the audience will feel what they need to feel without hand-holding. The setting doesn't spoon-feed emotion. It evokes it. When the citadel collapses in on itself at the film's end, it's not just the end of a journey. It's a visual metaphor for power breaking down, for hope trickling back into a thirsty world. The water flows. The people rise. And for the first time, the vertical hierarchy of the citadel is inverted. Those who were beneath now look down. And beyond them, the desert waits. It doesn't change. It doesn't celebrate. It simply watches. Because the setting, in all its brutality, in all its stillness, was never the enemy. It was the truth. And it made every scream, every fight, every sacrifice mean something. Against the backdrop of endless sand and sky, the smallest human moment, a glance, a name spoken, a breath shared, becomes monumental. That's the power of the setting. Not to overwhelm the story, but to etch it into the earth, into the flame, into the silence. And remind us, frame after frame, that even at the end of the world, cinema can still be a place where humanity survives. It began in a place where few movies dared to tread, not on a soundstage, not on digital backlit, but in the ancient windswept belly of the Namib Desert, where the earth is older than time and the horizon seems to stretch out forever, swallowing even the bravest ambitions. Into this nowhere land came a convoy of dreamers, actors, stunt performers, designers, gearheads, madmen, and filmmakers, all chasing a single, feverish vision from the mind of a 70-year-old director who believed the world didn't need another action movie. It needed a myth, hammered from metal, sweat, silence, and flame. But what happened behind the camera of this miracle in the desert? That's a story of chaos and camaraderie, of laughter in the dust, and tempers that flared hotter than the engine blocks they strapped to speeding cars. It's a story as wild as the one they told on screen, perhaps even more so. George Miller, the mastermind behind it all, was not what you'd expect. Soft-spoken, thoughtful, and possessing the calm of a monk, he stood at the helm of what became one of the most grueling, unpredictable productions in modern film history. He carried with him a sprawling collection of storyboards instead of a traditional script, thousands of panels sketched out by hand, showing every beat, every angle, every twist of motion like a war map. The cast and crew called it the Bible. It rarely left Miller's hands. His vision was so specific, so deeply internalized, that some actors were bewildered at first. Tom Hardy, cast as Max, admitted openly in later interviews that he couldn't make sense of it all during filming. "I was frustrated. I didn't get it," he confessed. The shoot was relentless. Hardy was strapped to vehicles, thrown into sandstorms, gagged with a metal muzzle for much of the first half of the shoot. Dialogue was sparse. Emotions were buried. He often felt like he was acting blind. Charlize Theron, meanwhile, knew exactly what she was doing, but it didn't make it easier. Playing Imperator Furiosa meant shaving her head, surrendering vanity, and embracing something raw and brutal. She trained extensively in combat choreography and spent endless hours encased in her mechanical arm rig. The physicality of the role was punishing. The emotional weight even more so. There were days when she barely spoke off camera, drained, physically and emotionally, by what the role demanded. The heat didn't help. Namibia was punishing. The days stretched on in oppressive sun, with temperatures soaring past 120 degrees Fahrenheit. Wind storms would rip across the flats, turning entire production days into wideouts. Cameras jammed with sand. Lenses cracked. Crew tents were blown into the dunes. Everything was covered in a thin sheen of dust. People called it the sand that never left, because even after showering, it clung to skin, to gear, to every fiber of clothing. Vehicles broke down constantly. And they weren't just props, they were fully functioning machines, each custom-built to perform under the harshest conditions. The war rig alone was an engineering marvel, with multiple driving stations hidden within its massive body so that stunt drivers could steer while actors performed on top. At least once a week, it broke. And the mechanical team, A dedicated band of grease-stained geniuses would rebuild it overnight, often scavenging from other vehicles to keep the machine alive. Yet despite the hardships, or perhaps because of them, the crew became a kind of family. They lived in close quarters for months. Shared meals. Shared sunburns. Shared long nights around desert campfires where actors, stunt performers, and set builders told stories, played music, and laughed over the absurdity of what they were trying to achieve. There was no escaping one another. And over time, bonds formed. The stunt team in particular was its own tribe. Led by George Miller's longtime collaborator Guy Norris, they pushed the limits of what was physically possible. Polecats trained for months before they even arrived on location, rehearsing their acrobatics in secret. Once on set, they rode 20-foot poles swaying from moving vehicles at 60 miles per hour, performing choreographed mid-air fights while being timed to the pulse of blaring music that was often played live to maintain rhythm. No wires. No nets. No faking. One of the most jaw-dropping facts, a staggering 80% of the stunts in the film were done practically in camera. CGI was used sparingly, mainly for things like removing safety harnesses or enhancing skies. The crashes? Real. The flips? Real. The explosions? Oh yes, very real. During one shoot, the production team detonated a rig so powerfully that the shockwave was felt by crew members stationed more than a mile away. Among the most memorable behind-the-scenes stories was that of the Doof Warrior. Strapped to a truck wall and flailing a double-necked guitar that also functioned as a flamethrower, the Doof Warrior became one of the most iconic visuals in the film. And he wasn't just a prop. Played by Australian musician Iota, the guitar really worked. The flames were real. And the speakers behind him blasted live music as the convoy rolled, allowing the cast and crew to feel the beat, literally, during each take. He was blind in one eye. He still climbed up there, strapped in, and performed while sandstorms howled and the trucks bucked beneath him. Even on the harder days, when the sun never let up, when tempers snapped, when injuries happened and retakes felt endless, there were moments of levity. Hardy, in his better moods, would entertain the crew between takes, improvising odd voices and dancing around the war rig. Theron was known to bring small treats, ice packs, cold drinks, for the makeup and costume team, who spent hours reapplying dirt and sweat that nature itself would wash away. George Miller, ever composed, would sit quietly, sketching. And when something finally clicked, when a shot landed, when a vehicle performed a move exactly as envisioned, he would stand up, smile, and simply nod. There were tensions, of course. The rumored rift between Hardy and Theron is no secret. Their on-screen dynamic, frosty, volatile, wary, reflected much of what was happening off-camera. But as the months wore on, something softened. Neither of them forgot how hard it was, but by the time the film was finished, they understood what they had been part of. Hardy publicly apologized at the Cannes premiere, acknowledging that he had underestimated the film and Miller. "I thought I was in the middle of a mess," he said. "Turns out I was in the middle of a masterpiece." And then there were the locals. Namibia's people were drawn to the production, curious about the machines and the madness. Miller made an effort to hire locally, security, catering, even extras, and welcomed the cultural exchange. Some tribespeople watched from afar as the doof wagon screamed past, eyes wide at the spectacle. For them, it was something out of legend, like witnessing a living dream tearing through the sand. When the final day of filming came, it didn't feel like a wrap. It felt like survival. There was no massive party. Just quiet exhale. The war rigs were parked one last time. The weapons stored. The costumes peeled off. And for a moment, in the silence that followed, the cast and crew stood together on the edge of the desert and looked out at the path behind them, a trail marked by flame, oil, effort, and belief. They had no idea what would come next. They didn't know that critics would hail the film as one of the greatest action movies ever made. That it would earn 10 Academy Award nominations. That it would win 6. that it would spark new conversations about storytelling, feminism, practical effects, and the art of cinematic clarity. They only knew they had endured something extraordinary. Years later, those who worked on the film still talk about it in reverent tones. About how they slept in the sand. About how they chased madness. About how, for one brief and impossible stretch of time, they became the story they were telling. Not just surviving, but driving headlong into fire, together, to make something that would never be forgotten. A film not just made in the desert, but forged there. The first time you see it, the world looks dead. Not dying, not fading, but long since buried. The sand is scorched, the sky bleeds fire, and humanity has collapsed into dust-choked echoes of its former self. There's no civilization anymore, only wreckage. And yet, in the center of this collapse, roaring through it in a cloud of fury and chrome, a story begins to pulse with something ancient and defiant. Something still alive. This is not a world without meaning. It's a world trying to remember what meaning is. And that is where the film begins, not with spectacle, but with a question. When everything is stripped away, what remains of the soul? Beneath its roaring engines and explosive choreography, beneath the brutal sandstorms and harrowing stunts, the story is a poem of survival, not just of bodies, but of ideals. Its themes don't scream. They haunt. They shimmer. They endure. It is a tale of resistance, of identity reclaimed, of humanity found in the unlikeliest places. And through this scorched, feverish dreamscape, the story weaves symbols as sharp as its metal and as delicate as its silence. At its core is the idea of redemption through motion. No one in this world is standing still. The road is both literal and spiritual, a path not just to escape, but to change. Max begins as a drifter consumed by memory, a man running from ghosts he cannot save. He says as much in his first voiceover, where he confesses that the world is fire and blood, and he has lost everything. His journey isn't toward a destination, it's toward reawakening, toward reconnection. And it happens not because he finds peace, but because he meets someone who still dares to fight for more than herself. That someone is Furiosa. She is not seeking redemption for herself, at least not at first. She is seeking freedom for others. The wives she carries in the war rig are her burden, her hope, her rebellion against the citadel and the rot that controls it. In them, she sees a future. In her, they see a path. But what Furiosa truly seeks is home. The green place, a memory kept alive in whispers, becomes her beacon. But when it's revealed to be gone, dead, poisoned by time, Furiosa's entire purpose fractures. And yet, in that fracture, she doesn't break. Because here lies another theme. Hope doesn't die, it transforms. Furiosa's journey is not about going home. It's about creating one. The moment she realizes the green place is no longer real is devastating. Her scream into the dust is one of the film's most human moments, a howl not of rage, but of mourning. But she gets back up. She turns around. She reclaims the very place she fled from. The idea that redemption isn't found in escape, but in return, becomes one of the story's most potent truths. The film is also a meditation on power and control, particularly over bodies. Immortan Joe, grotesque and godlike, doesn't just rule with violence. He rules through ownership. He hoards water, beauty, reproduction. The wives are not partners, they are breeders. Objects. Property. Their chambers are sterile and pristine, a sharp contrast to the rusted world outside. They are kept clean not for comfort, but for control. Their escape is not just physical, it is existential. In running, they reclaim their personhood. Their refusal to be things is not just dialogue. It is theme. It is war cry. The recurring phrase, "We are not things," becomes a mantra, a rejection of a system that sees people as resources. This theme extends to Max himself, who is literally reduced to a blood bag at the film's start. He's caged, muzzled, dehumanized, stripped of name and voice. His escape is not just from captivity, it is a reclamation of identity. He doesn't give his name until the end. And when he does, it's not shouted, it's whispered. Because identity, in this world, is not something declared. It's something earned. Nux's arc explores a different angle of dehumanization, fanaticism. Raised to worship death, trained to believe that martyrdom will buy him glory, Nux begins the story as a true believer. His face is painted in ash, his mouth sprayed with chrome. He is ready to die for a cause he doesn't understand. But it only takes a spark, one act of kindness from capable, for that belief to begin to unravel. His arc is quiet but profound. He begins as a tool. He ends as a man. And when he dies, it's not for Immortan Joe. It's for his friends. For something real. Another subtle but powerful theme is feminine power and solidarity. This is not a story where women exist to support male arcs. In fact, it's the inverse. Max, for all his physical strength and survival skill, is not the driver of the plot. Furiosa is. The wives are. The Vuvellini, elder women who ride like warriors and carry seeds in their satchels, represent not just resistance, but rebirth. The film doesn't preach. It simply shows that the world, once destroyed by greed and war, might be saved by those who know how to nurture as well as fight. Even small symbols become layered with meaning. The steering wheel, for example. In this world, it's sacred. War boys anoint themselves in chrome before gripping it. They pray to it, die for it. The wheel becomes a symbol of agency, of being in control, even if only for a moment. And so when Furiosa drives the war rig, she isn't just steering a vehicle, she is reclaiming autonomy. And when the war boys whisper "witness me" before leaping into death, they are begging for meaning, for validation in a world that has made them expendable. The chrome spray they inhale is another layer, both a drug and a ritual, a holy act in a faith built on combustion. It mirrors our own world's obsessions with legacy, martyrdom, and spectacle. These boys don't want peace. They want to be seen. And that, perhaps, is the most tragic part. They are not villains. They are lost. Another rich symbol is the desert itself. It is not just setting. It is spirit. The desert is vast, merciless, purifying. It strips everything down. In the face of that endless openness, masks fall away. People become who they truly are. Furiosa, Max, Nux, the wives, they are shaped by the road, scorched into clarity. The desert doesn't forgive, but it does reveal. The use of music and sound also ties into the film's symbolic fabric. The Doof warrior, strapped to a moving wall of speakers, playing a flamethrower guitar, is absurd on the surface. But he represents something deeper, the need to create meaning through art, even in war. His presence is mythic, operatic. He turns battle into ritual. Just as the wives reclaim their freedom, the Doof warrior reclaims music as power. It's wild. It's surreal. And it's absolutely symbolic. The final act of the story, where the war rig turns around and charges back toward the citadel, is a thematic culmination. It isn't a retreat. It's a revolution. It says, we will not run from our past. We will take it back. The citadel, once a symbol of oppression, becomes the ground zero for liberation. Water, once hoarded, now flows freely. And when Furiosa rises on the platform, surrounded by people who once knelt beneath Immortan Joe, the hierarchy is broken. Not replaced. Broken. Max doesn't stay to celebrate. Because he was never the king. Never the savior. He was the witness. And that, too, is symbolic. That sometimes the greatest thing you can do is help others rise, and then walk away. In the end, the film is many things. It is action, yes, pure, relentless motion. But it is also philosophy in disguise. A fable in fire. A sermon on wheels. It tells us that even in a world reduced to ash, where humanity has forgotten its soul, there are still those who choose to protect, to nurture, to fight not for domination, but for restoration. And maybe that's the most powerful theme of all. That what was lost can be found. That what was broken can be mended. That even in a place where life seems impossible, something beautiful can still bloom. It all starts with a decision, a refusal, really, to make just another action movie. Instead, the filmmakers chose to craft a moving, burning painting. A living, roaring fable of motion and silence, of dust and chrome. Every technique, every lens choice, every explosion and heartbeat in the score was built to serve something bigger than spectacle. It was built to serve myth. And so, what unfurled across the desert, and later across theater screens around the world, was not just a story, but an experience. A shot of adrenaline straight into the bloodstream of cinema. The first thing you notice about the filmmaking is the sheer physicality of it. There is no cheating here. The cars are real. The stunts are real. The dust that cakes the actors' faces is not the result of a makeup brush. It's the breath of the Namib Desert itself. Director George Miller committed to doing as much in-camera as humanly possible, refusing to lean on CGI to create his world. Visual effects were reserved mainly for enhancements, erasing safety rigs, extending landscapes, intensifying colors. But the bones of it, the chase, the crashes, the acrobatics on poles soaring above war rigs, those were captured through the lens, through sweat and physics and fear. This insistence on practicality changed everything. It grounded the film in a tactile reality that most modern blockbusters lack. When a car flips into the air, spinning end over end before bursting into fire, you can feel the gravity. When characters leap between speeding vehicles, the danger hums through the screen. Your body believes it because the actors and stunt performers actually did it. The cinematography, led by the legendary John Seale, was tailored to that authenticity. Miller and Seale decided early on to center the action in the frame at all times. This simple but radical decision allowed the audience to process the chaos without confusion. No shaky cam. No frenetic, incomprehensible edits. Just clean, precise framing that lets your eyes follow the momentum naturally. Every vehicle, every body, every explosion is positioned to maintain orientation. It's why, even in the film's most chaotic moments, you never lose track of where you are or who you're following. This method of filming created a rhythm almost like dance. Action wasn't just staged, it was choreographed. Stunt teams and camera operators moved in tandem, rehearsing intricate sequences that required perfect timing. Vehicles had to hit their marks at full speed. Actors had to deliver performances inside moving death traps. Cameramen strapped themselves to custom rigs, bouncing alongside war machines, capturing intimacy inside madness. Every shot had weight, texture, consequence. Even the editing embraced this dance.